I'm going to introduce Hailee Attorri. Now, Hailee Attorri is a resident of Nashua. She's a member of the Association of Gravestone Studies, and she's a high school history teacher. Let me tell you a little bit about how I met Hailee. So my daughter lives on the same street that Hailee lives on, and I was just talking to my daughter one night, and I said, you know, we're trying to get together this program for a graveyard tour, which we are planning, by the way. We're planning a graveyard tour in April. And she said, Mom, there's a girl across the street, and her bumper sticker says, I stop for graveyards. and so I said to my daughter, well, I think we're going to go across the street and meet this woman. And sure enough, there was, and that's how I met Hailee. So welcome, Hailee.
Thank you.
Here you go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to answer any of your questions at the end. So if you have them, I'd be more than happy to answer them or attempt to answer them. Welcome to Whispers of the Departed, Unveiling Local Gravestones and Their Symbolic Stories. I'm going to leave a quote with you to ponder while we go through this presentation. And this is a common phrase that you see on gravestones in the area. Remember me as you walk by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, soon you will be, so prepare yourself to follow me. So I'll let you think about that during this. All right. So why study gravestones? Since cemeteries can be found in or near any town or city in the U.S., they are free primary sources, and the teacher in me loves that. Not only do cemeteries act as a place of remembrance, but they also serve to give a historical record of a particular place, its people, its events, religious beliefs, diseases, and wars. Studying your local gravestones can give us a tangible artifact that can help to better understand history. And studying gravestones in general can help us better understand religious ideologies and even race relations. And most importantly, studying gravestones creates a better understanding of the importance of historic preservation as we learn to recognize a cemetery's significance and importance. All right, so about me. I am a daughter, sister, wife, and mom. I have a bachelor's of history and master's in the art of teaching history. I am a member of the Association of Gravestone Studies. Anyone can join, by the way, so if you have questions, let me know. I'm a history teacher. I'm a taphophile. Does anyone know what a taphophile is? Yeah. Yes?
It means to study cemeteries, graveyards.
Yeah, exactly. So all of you are taphophiles tonight. I've always loved looking at graves, even as a kid, and I started taking pictures. I got an iPhone in 2013, so I started taking pictures with my iPhone then, and in 2020, I was able to put all of those photos together in an Instagram account, and I share sort of the stories of some of the interesting stones that I come across. So if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you can take your phones out. Follow me. I don't know if anyone's on Instagram here, but this is my page. It's Hales_stones. I started it during the pandemic because it was very easy to social distance in a cemetery. I was able to travel around New England finding unique gravestones. And the way I find them, and I'll kind of talk about some of the ways you can research gravestones, I pull over. I have that bumper sticker so the people behind me know, I'm going to stop short if I see one. And also I find them on findagrave.com or using the Farber Collection online database, which I will talk about towards the end of this talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about gravestone symbols, and I focus predominantly on the time period of like colonial and federal style stones. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. You're going to start to see patterns emerge in the artwork that you see in cemeteries, and you can actually tell what time period that stone is from even before you read what the stone says. So here are some of the following common symbols. Death's face or death's winged face, that's a very common symbol from the 17th and early 18th century. Cherub, mid to late 18th and early 19th century. Willow and urn, which is early 19th century. And each of these symbols represent the changing ideologies surrounding death and religion. Modern day symbols, they actually vary greatly. It really depends on a person's religious belief, country of origin, etc. So I'll talk about what each stone symbol sort of represents and why it shows this change in religion and beliefs. So this is Death Wing's face. It's the symbol that I used for this talk. It's from the old Dunstable Cemetery on Daniel Webster in Nashua. And Death Wing's face, it really is a symbol of sort of early Puritan, early settler ideology about religion and death. They were used to death. Death was something that happened all the time, and it was something they just had to, face every day. The imagery that you see is mostly like skulls, bones, that sort of thing. And what they sort of represent is the people did not want to make pictures of God in their stones, and they didn't want to have any sort of idols represented in their stones, so they're mostly pretty morbid depictions of death. Then you start to move into the cherub phase, and cherubs are really kind of subjective. They're very different in how they look. Sometimes they just represent a human. Sometimes they're like a baby, like a cherub baby, and sometimes they're a little bit more detailed to represent the person that is buried there. And this is because as people started to come to America, settle here, there was a more diverse background of religion that was mixing in. And so that morbid sort of association with death started to change. Additionally, as people settled in New England especially, they started to get healthier. And in fact, at one point, New England was the healthiest place in the whole world. And they were the healthiest, they lived the longest, they had grandparents, which was a concept not really seen elsewhere. And so with that comes less morbid depictions of death. As our nation changed and actually became a nation, we started to look at the Greek and Roman ancient periods and started to idolize that, not only in our gravestone art, but also in our architecture. You have a urn, like a Grecian urn, depicted in your stones. Can't really see it here, it's a little light, but here's the willow, and then actually underneath it is the urn as well. So this was a chart that I created of the stones in the old Dunstable burial ground. Again, this is on Daniel Webster in Nashua. And I would say, because I do this as a hobby, these are sort of approximate classifications. And I think cherub and death wing's face kind of overlap a little bit, so it's subjective. But I did my very best to try to classify the years in which I saw a death's face. And then I tried very hard to classify which ones were cherubs. And then finally the willow and urn. What I really liked about the cemetery is this was what the data showed me. There was about 20 years of overlap for these symbols. So you can actually see how there's change, but there's still people holding on to that old sort of ideology, but it gradually changes. So these are stones, they're in New Hampshire, but they're not in Nashua. I actually found them last weekend, and I wanted to share them with you. They're really interesting. So this stone right here is from 1759, and it is of a skull and crossbones. It's your early colonial kind of morbid depiction of death. This one was made 12 years later, and it still has this sort of morbid depiction of death. It almost looks identical. I have a theory. I think they were carved before they were used. And it was just like today. You go, you pick out the model you like, and then you fill in the blanks, right? I think that's what they did here. Because even where the skull has sort of those cracks in the skull, they're identical in both stones. But they're 12 years apart. It started to really go out of fashion at this time, too. You see more cherub at this time. But then, the craziest thing. I found one with skull and crossbone, and a willow and urn. I've never seen anything like it before in my life. And it was really exciting to see. And it confirmed my theory that these were made already. And someone just went in and they said, you know what, the style now in 1781 is the willow and urn. Another thing that caught my attention, and this is just sort of an aside, Tobias Lear. Does that name ring a bell? Well, who? Anyone?
His son was the personal secretary of George Washington.
There you go. His son was this guy. He gets an extra ticket if he wants to put his name in the bucket here. His son is the personal secretary of George Washington during his presidency. And the Tobias Lear that was the fifth Tobias Lear that existed, he was the fourth. And they were the 5 generations of Tobias Lears that lived in America. So it was very cool to see this. And they're from Portsmouth, so it was really cool. So a lot of reasons why this really stood out to me, this stone. It was really incredible. And again, I've never seen any combination like that before. So I will talk about this cemetery at the end, so if you want to visit it, you can. All right, so along with the artistic changes, there are language changes as well. At the beginning of the colonial period, you encounter phrases such as, "Here lies ye body of." And it transitions at the end of the colonial period and beginning of the federal period to "in memory of." And these changes reflect the changing ideologies on death and religion as well, just like the artwork. This right here, again, another from Portsmouth. This is an older one, and it says, "Here lies ye body of." And this one is "sacred to the memory of." So it's a very nice, not morbid approach to this gravestone. However, look at this. But this one still ends up being morbid at the end with a little inscription right here. "He bore a lingering illness with patience and met the king of terrors with a smile." So they still had to put that in there. So Old Dunstable Cemetery, this is the oldest cemetery in Nashua. And the earliest burial here, earliest, is 1687, and the most recent is 1966. But most of the stones date from around 1740s to about the 1830s. This was originally in Massachusetts before the borders were set, and it's my favorite in Nashua. I actually used to live right near here, so I used to go here an awful lot. It's very easy to walk to. This is my favorite stone in this very favorite cemetery. This is Thomas Lund. So I'm going to let you read this and see if anything stands out. I'll tell you soon. I just wanted to do it for dramatic effect. This ending here, this is why I like it. "This man with 7 more that lies in this grave was slew all in a day by the Indians." So this is a close-up. It's Deathwing's face here. And at the top you have Memento Mori. That means remember you too shall die. He was killed 4 days before his 42nd birthday. According to genealogy.com, he was married in Concord. They moved to the Dunstable area, which now is Nashua, In 1732, he was a soldier in Captain Jabez Fairbanks' company, which was engaged in scouting for the protection of Dunstable, Groton, Lunenburg, and Lancaster. He was one of the snowshoemen in Captain Tyng's company that was in 1703 to 1704, and then he was one of the 8 men that were slain by the Indians. And then this is what was said when he died in his estate, that Thomas Lunn killed by the Indian enemy. He was granted to his widow all of his things. He had 408 pounds and 10 shillings. Sounds pretty good, yeah. Another man who was also killed in the attack, Oliver Farwell. This is just an account of the day that it happened. Really, it's just continues to just be a real tragic day for people in that area. So this kind of is the account. I'll just kind of read a few things from here. I'll actually read it from this computer here. They were waylaid, fired upon by the Indians, and all killed except Josiah Farwell, nephew of Oliver, who was vigorously chased by them for some time without either gaining much advantage, till he darted into a thicket where they lost sight of him, and fearing he might have reloaded, abandoned the pursuit. Thus he alone escaped, to fall by the hand of the same savage enemy the next year. This was written a long time ago. But this is, see here it says 8 were found, placed in coffins, and buried in one grave. So that's right next to Thomas Lunn's grave. This is Caleb Blanchard, and I shared this stone for a few reasons. So here lies the body of Caleb Blanchard, the son of the Honorable Joseph Blanchard. The rest is unreadable at the bottom. There is very small text that I can't decipher at the bottom. Some of it is hidden by the dirt, and some is just really unreadable. So Caleb was the son of the Honorable Joseph Blanchard and Rebecca Hubbard Blanchard. He was one of 8 children. His grave exemplified the early period of gravestone symbolism with a very morbid display of a skull and crossbones. And skull and crossbones, they reminded the viewers of their own mortality, because it's certainly not for him, it's for the viewer. This is another grave that's in Old Dunstable, Oliver Ears. So here lies the body of Oliver Ears, son of Joseph Ears and Mrs. Bridget Ears, his wife, who died December 26, AD 1757, being 8 months and 8 days old. You know, it's just tragic. Here is another example of the viewer's own mortality with the skull at the forefront of the grave. Sometimes you'll find the skull without crossbones, and you'll find them without the wings. So it's still kind of considered death face or death wings face. All right, I'm going to talk about Gilson Cemetery. Yes. So if you search Gilson Cemetery, the first of many articles, as you can see here, all show that this cemetery is allegedly haunted. Has anyone ever visited Gilson Cemetery? Have you ever felt warm in the winter or cold in the summer? No? That's allegedly what happens when you're there. How about, has anyone heard a mother crying for her baby? No. Okay. Unfortunately, and this is my opinion, the cemetery is in a little rough shape because of the visitors that go there. So again, these are the articles that you'll see. You know, visit a haunted cemetery in a historic mansion. I don't know where that historic mansion is, though. Mystery legends surround Gilson Cemetery. Ghosts, strange graves, and general weirdness at Gilson Cemetery. Don't visit this notorious New Hampshire cemetery alone. Gilson Road Cemetery, most haunted cemetery in the U.S. If you've been there, it's a very underwhelming cemetery. Very underwhelming. In a very nice neighborhood, though. So this is the reason why it's allegedly haunted. Can you see the reason Yes, there is a lot of lichen on it, but look above that large area of lichen above it. It's a hole. And it's circular. That's why. Yes, some people say it might be a musket ball, but there's no real cracking around it. So it's a portal. It's cursed. Exactly. You can come up with a whole slew of reasons why. But then this is what happens. I know. You know how many times I've been there and I want to clean it up? But, that rumor that if you clean up what's at a grave, the, soul will come and haunt you. I don't want that to happen. So, but my opinion is, this is a very grungy looking Scooby-Doo. A little boy who died in 1810 doesn't know who Scooby-Doo is. So why don't we clean it up, So it's allegedly haunted because of a circular hole in the stone. So according to a blog post from New England Folklore, a ghost will appear if you leave the cemetery and shout, "Betty Gilson, I have your baby." The ghost appears as a woman in colonial-era clothing and is sometimes seen in the middle of Gilson Road. At other times, she hides behind the trees that line the road. All because the rounded hole in the gravestone. What bothers me is the trinkets, honestly. They leave them, they look nice maybe at first, but then they end up all over the cemetery and it just looks like a lot of trash. I didn't show other pictures, but I just went the other day to make sure that, Scooby-Doo is still there. It's been there since 2019. Yes. Now the trash has gone on to other stones that are in the cemetery. And if anyone knows who to talk to about that, let me know, because I'll get in touch. It could be the city, yeah, I guess, but why don't they clean it up? I don't get it. So this leads me to what you should leave and what shouldn't you leave at a cemetery. So things that are okay to leave at a grave if they're your friend or a family member, flowers or plants. Some people leave small stones. Sometimes coins are acceptable. Things you really shouldn't leave, and this is a lot of websites say it, stuffed animals. They get grungy real quick. Fencing. That actually, there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do it. People who mow the lawn, it actually is a safety concern. People might trip over it. And then really, and this is a good rule of thumb, anything at a grave that doesn't belong to a family member of yours or a friend of yours, you really shouldn't leave anything. So if it's not your family member or friend, I don't know, just walk by, So we mentioned lichen before, and I wanted to share a little bit about lichen. You see this often. It's sort of like a moldy growth on gravestones, and they are pretty common because especially in slate, which is what most of the stones in this area are made out of, when you carve into a slate stone, it creates those grooves and crevices. It's really easy for the lichen to get into and grow. If it's a family member's gravestone, you can clean it up with distilled water and a plastic brush. If it's really caked on there, like that middle one that's really caked on there, that you would have to probably get a special brush for that deals specifically in lichen. But again, if it's not a family member or a friend, I'd leave it alone because you don't want to cause unnecessary damage to the stone. But you'll see this often in New England. That one, I'm a teacher, so I actually took my students to a cemetery today. And that one I saw today at the cemetery I took them to. And this is from the Ears stone that I just showed. And this is also from Old Dunstable Cemetery. I'm going to talk a little bit about access to gravestone resources. So if you want to go on your own adventures, you can use these sources. There are several places you can find gravestones to research in your community. I would say the first place to start is at a cemetery near you. But if you're looking for graves outside your state or even your country, there are places you can go and find them. The American Antiquarian Society has hundreds of photographs, and I really should say thousands of photographs of stones through their Farber Gravestone collection. This is an online collection as well as an in-person collection that you can go to in Worcester if you're ever in the area. I use the online version. You type in a town or a city, most in New England, and you can find what stones are there, who carved the stone, what year it was, what symbols are on that stone. So this is a really amazing resource. Also, the Library of Congress digital access has some through a quick search on their website, so loc.gov. And findagrave.com is an amazing resource if you want to use local stones. How many people have ever been on Find a Grave? Yeah, a great website, tells you a lot about it. And also, if you find that you're the only person who's visited that grave, you can upload the picture yourself, give a little description about that person, and then other people can appreciate it that way. And so I do a lot of my research on stones through really all of these websites. I would say the one that I use the most is Find a Grave, and the one that I use second is the Farber collection. And once you start using the Farber collection, you'll be able to go into a cemetery and say, oh, that's a Farber collection stone. So also, this is a weird thing that I've come across. There are even QR codes and living memorials you can find on the internet. Gravestones now can come with a QR code. So you can take a picture of it and it'll come up on your phone with a little bit more, maybe a video of the person. So that is something that, yeah, is possible. This is a glimpse at the Farber collection. So again, you just go online. I would type into Google like Farber Collection Digital, and that'll take you to a couple of different websites. The one that allows you to search is the one to pick, and you can just type in either, say you have a grave that you want to learn more about, you can just type in their name on the website, or if you are like, I'm visiting this town, I want to see what cool gravestones are there, you can type in the town. So preservation. Historians have called cemeteries open-air museums, and they really are. They're some of the best bargains in terms of museums. They're free, open sun up to sundown. According to the National Park Service, cemeteries found across the country are not only places of burial, but they also provide a vivid record of community history. Whether large or small, well-maintained or neglected, historic cemeteries are an important part of our cultural landscape. The vast richness of expression through form, decoration, and materials informs our understanding of the individuals buried in historic cemeteries and their cultural significance. So I'm going to list just some of my favorite cemeteries. As I was sitting here before, I was thinking, oof, I wish I put that on my list. But if there's a cemetery in New England, especially New Hampshire or Massachusetts, I've probably been, so we can talk for sure if you've been to one of those. I teach in Lunenburg, Massachusetts. I don't know if you know where that is. I didn't before I worked there, but I didn't. I take my students to North Cemetery, and so I've been there, 30 times with students over the past 12 years, and like I went there today. It's my October field trip with my students. It's a really special place for me to kind of talk with my students and teach them my love of gravestones and connect it to our curriculum. And so both North and South cemeteries in Lunenburg are amazing. South Cemetery in Lunenburg actually has older stones than North, but it's too far away for me to take my students there and walk there in a period and back. So we go to North, but it's still very old and very cool. Point of Graves in Portsmouth, that's the cemetery that I showed you with those really old, cool gravestones and Tobias Lear's gravestone. So it's small, but mighty. It's a very good cemetery. The Congregational Church Cemetery in Hollis, New Hampshire, that has some of the most interesting stories that I've seen on gravestones and have very unique stones that are created by this one particular family of carvers, and there's just so many to explore. You could spend a whole afternoon looking. Old Burying Ground in New Ipswich, New Hampshire. This cemetery has stones with really cool graphics on it. A lot of people, like women, are depicted in some of the stones, and some of the stories on those stones are really incredible too. The Shaker Burial Ground in Harvard, they call it Lollipop Cemetery, and they're these metal gravestones that are shaped like lollipops that just stick out of the ground. And they have really unique names, but all they really have is the name of the person, the year they were born, and the year that they died. That's it. And so you can go and just see all these lollipop gravestones in this cemetery. And of course, there are no Shakers left in either New Hampshire or Massachusetts. The only ones that are left are in Maine, and I think there's like 2 that are still remaining. So this burial ground is very unique and cool. The Center Cemetery in Shirley, Massachusetts. My favorite carver had a workshop in Shirley. His name is John Dwight, and his stones are very identifiable. They have these things called sprouts, and they're known in the taphophile community as Dwight's sprouts. And you can see a Dwight sprout from a mile away. They're very cool. I definitely recommend checking that out. Center Cemetery in Shirley has a lot of his work. The Old Burying Ground in Groton, Massachusetts, especially this area, has a lot of stones that were crafted in Groton, Mass. In Groton, they have a whole family of carvers, and they're called the Park family. They have a very distinct look as well. I don't like them that much, but they're everywhere. So I do encounter, I know it's blasphemy, I know. This guy knows what I'm talking about. I like some of the Park stones. I like some of them. But if you like the Park stones, you'll be in a real treat at Old Burying Ground in Groton. West Cemetery in Amherst, Massachusetts. When you go out further west in New England, the stones do change from slate to sort of softer stones, and they have a very distinct look. When you carve into slate versus anything else, slate's very workable. It can do what you want it to do. It does. It works the way you want it to. And I say this like I've carved a stone before. I've never carved a stone before. But slate really works for you. Out in the western part of New England, the stones are different, so the designs are different. And you see some of those, it's more like Connecticut stones. And I haven't even really touched upon Connecticut stones. I mean, that would be a whole other hour. But Connecticut stones and that whole area, they have a very distinct look. They're made with a different stone. And you can see them in this cemetery, in West Cemetery in Amherst. But also, Emily Dickinson is buried there. So that's real fun. Stockbridge Cemetery in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. This cemetery has a very unique feature. It's called the Sedgwick Pie. And it's shaped in a circle. And not only is it shaped in a circle, I mean, that's cool in itself. All these stones are sort of organized in a circle. They have Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman buried there. And she's one of 2 people who challenged slavery in Massachusetts when the Massachusetts Constitution came out. And she sued the state for her freedom and got it, then ended up working for the family of the lawyer who did this for her, and she was buried with the family, the Sedgwick family. So it's a circle, it's really cool, and there's, a black woman in a white family circle, and that's really incredible. Hall and Dean Cemetery in Rainham, Massachusetts. That's the cemetery that started it all for me. My hometown is Rainham, Massachusetts, and in this cemetery, there is a stone of a formerly enslaved person. His name's Toby Gilmore. Town lore says he worked for George Washington. I don't know. That could just be town lore. But he definitely served in the American Revolution, and then he was buried in this cemetery, not far from this amazing family who was really above their, ahead of their time. And they're the Shaw family of Rainham. And one stone that caught my attention back in 2013 was a man by the name of Parmenio C. Shaw, and he died at the age of 35. I did some research on him because his gravestone really captured my attention. It was a 16th or 17th century play, tragedy, that was listed on his stone. And I thought that's a very unique thing to have in Raynham, Massachusetts in 1815. And it was because his family, I found out through research, had the largest library in Raynham. So he was very educated. He was actually, Parmenio is a name of a Macedonian warrior, and his brother was also named after a Macedonian warrior, and his sister was named after a queen, and his middle name is from a mathematician, so they're very educated family. And finally, Granary Burial Ground in Boston. Paul Revere is buried there, and Samuel Adams, John Hancock. Very interesting cemetery. Of course, if you go to Granary, the body is probably not where the stone is. Over the years, Boston needed to build, so the cemetery got smaller and smaller. They started first by removing the footstones, very common in New England for towns to remove them in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We know now you shouldn't do that. But they had to kind of compact everyone in, so the bodies don't really correspond with everybody there, which is, a little disappointing. Some of the famous people, I'm sure they are, but for the most part, they aren't. Questions? All right.
So that sample picture that you did earlier of the Lovewell from 1740-ish, what's interesting about that is the Lovewell family within, old Dunstable, Nashua, they actually paid for a church, a meeting house to be built, and it was, on just off South Main Street. And one of the reasons why is because they were introducing the Great Awakening to the area, which was a movement in this area. So they helped finance that would be, and that was rivaling the other major meeting house and the major religion that was there. So for a while, and so that family in particular kind of brought that into the area, and that was in the 1730s, 1740s.
Yeah.
So that was a particularly good example right there.
Yeah, great. And especially, too, it's like the cherub, so it is showing that changing ideology.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions, thoughts? Yes?
What was the name of the association? The graveyard?
Yeah, it's the Association of Gravestone Studies. So you can go and join them. I think membership's $55, and that's it. That you are a member. But you do get books and magazines sent to your house for being a member. And you can even submit articles that you write if you would like to put it into their magazine.
So I was surprised you didn't mention the stones that are not stones, that they're cast metal.
Oh yeah, so those are white bronze. They're called zinkies to us in the taphophile community. Those are commercialized. You could buy them in a catalog. They really peaked after the Civil War, and the last zinkies that you see are probably from the 1920s if the family really liked them. The interesting thing about white bronze is there's nothing inside. It's fake. It's hollow. You can knock on it, and is that what you're talking about? Yes. So they are settling very badly. They settle they just start to, the weight of the whole thing starts to just go towards the bottom. They crack, pieces break off, but they're still very cool to look at. When you see them from far away, I always go, oh, there's a zinky. There's a whole other sub-community online of taphophiles who love zinkies. So I'm partial to zinkies. They're not my favorite, but I do like seeing them. You can buy certain designs. A lot of families had things that were important to them. Typical symbols on zinkies are hay or anchors. I'm trying to think of other zinky symbolism, but really it's a whole slew of things. You could put anything on it. And then as people died, you just bought a new little placard and put it on it. So you could just screw it in. Yep, Chester Village Cemetery, great zinkies. Then if you go in the back of that cemetery, they have really old, Death Wing's face, but you really got to look. One of my favorite zinkies I've ever seen is from that cemetery. It has a picture of Abraham Lincoln. Yes, and it is amazing. You don't really see those, so that's why I was like, ooh, that is a good zinky. That's a good one. All right, so I think you're able to explore the museum, and thank you all so much for coming.